My name's Tim. I'm a musician, a car collector, an automotive journalist, and a lover of all things automotive. I've bought and sold collectible cars for 2 decades, and I hope my experiences and my point of view helps you find the car of your dreams.
The Porsche 911, it's a car we talk about a lot on Tim's Enthusiast Garage. And behind me here, we have a car that is a 996.1, an earlier 911 996. You can tell with the headlights, these are gonna have the earlier style headlights. This car has the Lightronic lights, so they look a little more, you can see a projector beam in there, which is a little different than the stock light that the car came with. But the 996, if you've watched my 996.2 video, it's a car that I love. It's a car that I owned for many years. I did sell it, and the reason that this car is here is I really had an itch for a 911 again. And in doing so, I went back, and I've owned almost all of them, but I went back and I drove, a G50 car, I drove a 964, I drove some 993s, and interestingly, the 996 is still one of my favorite cars, particularly these 996.1s have definitely, people go on and on about how there's a vibe with 996.1s because, early 996s were made at the same time as 993s, and there's this, throttle cable, and they're a little more visceral. I just think that the 996 is a package where you have just lightweight still, again, a car that is in that just at 3,000 pounds with around 300 horsepower. It's a really nice, and Porsche horsepower is a lot different than other horsepower. I mean, if you've driven one of these cars, you're like, there's no way this car only has, 300 horsepower. Well, surprise, they don't make a ton of power, but they use it and they deploy it really, really well. Having all that weight over the back axle definitely helps. If you look at this car, and here we have a later 997. 997 is a wider car. This is a Carrera S, a later 911. And they just grew, they kept growing. And now with the later 991, 992s, there's such big cars. There's a lot of mass. And with these cars, you come out of a 993 and it's still very much an old 911. This, interestingly, feels like an old 911 that's just a little bit newer. And I think that these needed to get a little bit of age on them for us to really appreciate everything that the 996 has to offer. Now, this car came because I had a guy that wanted to trade me one of my cars for this car plus a little bit of cash. And when I saw this car, I told him, it's got to go to bring a trailer. It's almost too nice for because I wanted kind of a driver, and I did just go on a little bit of a buying spree. But again, in looking down the side of this car, you can see the 996s, especially the non-C4S or turbo cars, do have a very narrow body. And I think that's one of the things that has hurt in terms of what people really like about 911s. With the 993 and particularly like turbo 964s, you get this super exaggerated rear hips. In this car, it's a little needy in the hips department. If you come around back on the car, I think one of the best views of this car is this hip over the back 3/4. If you look at this car from the rear 3/4, it does have some hips. And especially with the Aerokit like this car is equipped with, I think it still gives all the 911 vibes. You still get that sort of boomerang rear window, and I don't know. I've always liked 996s. We're going to take this car for a drive. The early 996 is a 3.4. The 996.2 moves into a 3.6 liter, and it's one of those things where, certain people prefer these cars, certain people prefer the latter. I used to be very much a 996.2 fanboy. If you've watched my red 996.2 video, I may come across as a bit of a fanboy. But with this car, this is exactly how I would spec if I was going to order a 911 in 99 or 2000, it would have been spec'd exactly this way. And again, this is a 3.4 liter engine. It's equipped with the X74, so that's going to be the sports suspension. It has a lot of, you'll hear me mention Xcode options. This car again has Xcode options, similar, not dissimilar from my red car. It has sports seats. I am a fan of the sports seats in this car. They're definitely not quite as functional as the sports seats in like the 964 and like 951 sports seats. Man, those things have huge bolsters that really kind of keep you in the seat. These don't so much keep you in the seat, but in terms of the way this car is spec'd, again with the Aero pack, and if you've seen pictures of the Aero pack, pictures almost don't do it justice. You get this tasty little lip. You get these inlets right here that kind of are direct into the air box. There's just a lot of like detail that I think that the Aero package just really highlights on this car, gives it a little more voluptuousness. The other thing about this particular 911 is they didn't make a ton of them in white. And when you see a 996 with the Aerokit in white, it gives me like body in white GT3 vibes. That I'm not saying this car performs like a GT3, but having the sports suspension, having the Aerokit, it's got an exhaust mod, so the exhaust is a little bit louder. What you get out of this car for the price, again, relative to like a 993 or even a 964, these cars are a ridiculous bargain. Earlier cars like this have a dual row IMS bearing. If you watch my other video, you know IMS bearing is definitely, can be an issue. It actually hampers a very small amount of the cars. This car has been maintained by a place called Steinel's. I would not worry about it. This car, I would buy this car, drive this car. I think if you own a 996, oil analysis is always a great idea. If you own a E46 or a E60 or an E92, actually if you own any BMW, doing oil analysis is a good idea because if you know what's going on in your engine. But I would drive this car absolutely, no question in my mind. It has full service history, it's amazing. Later cars like this 997 actually suffer from board scoring at a little bit higher rate than what the IMS ever was with this car. With that being said, let's hop in the car and go for a ride. So this particular 996 is a sweet one. 996s in general are such underrated sweethearts that it breaks my heart that they still are undervalued compared with all their, maybe it's a great thing because we can all still afford them as opposed to, if you wanted a C2 from, a 964. So the name of the game in 996 is value. Plain and simple, value. You get, in my estimation, all of the fun and goodness that makes a 911 a great car with a slightly updated version of what a 993 would be with modern reliability. I don't know. It's quieter, it's more of a GT. Some of these things could be seen as a bit of a drawback compared with the 993. For me, it's a much more livable, everyday 911. It still gives vintage vibes, so it's definitely a car that, when I drive one of these cars, I feel like I'm driving a special sports car. It's definitely something that gives me vintage car vibes. 996s have such a sweet gear change, such a sweet clutch interaction. It's such a great package. 3.4 versus 3.6, honestly, there's a lot of commentary about that online. I don't know. They're both great. I mean, I really think it comes down to the look, the best looking 996 for you. Some people really like early, like C4S's because they have that big butt. I mean, it's whatever you're into.
I like a C2. I love cars that have the extended leather. This car has a lot of the options that, like if I were gonna spec one of these new, you know, I liked the Alcantara headliner. I like the stitching. I love, you know, sports seats. I think in these, really it's kind of a make or break it type of thing. I just really like 996s with sports seats. But the car is so well balanced. I would even say, and I think I might have said this in my earlier video of the 3.6 cars, it's just, I think, such a better Porsche, such a better car than a 993 as a car. Now, is it a better, you know, traditional 911? I mean, they definitely changed the formula, but now as these cars have gotten so giant, and 992s are almost like comedic, you know, this size I love, the immediacy of everything, and again, I love how light the controls are, especially, you know, the directionality of the steering is not so aggressive that, you know, it's not like such a short rack that it makes it impractical. You really could daily use this car in almost, you know, every circumstance. You can run errands with this car. It really is just like a do it all. And I think that's one of the things with the 911 in general, that, you know, why isn't it the perfect, why don't I have one currently? You know, I saw this car, it really wasn't, it's almost too nice to be a driver, and I kind of wanted one that I could use as literally like a daily driver, just, you know, sort of drive the wheels off of it. You know, this car's got 50,000 miles. It's like a, almost, it's not one of one, but it's like a very rare option package set. I love these in white, are fantastic. I personally like the Savannah beige. I know some people, I would prefer to have Savannah beige than gray on the inside of one of these cars, or black, really, for that matter. This contrast I love. As far as, you know, like the carbon fiber pack and stuff, which is very much sort of a period piece, you know, this if you like early 2000s, late 90s vibes, this kind of gives that to me, in a way that obviously the newer cars are better, you know. So, but I really like, there's a charm, and these kind of, as I said earlier, are now into that point where they kind of give old car vibes, but in a different way than a 993 does. I really like it. I mean, I could shift through one of these cars all day, every day. What I will say is that, and I might mention this later in another video, I recently bought a Ferrari, and I think for me, a car like the 4C, which you don't want to take on date night, or a car that's more compromised, that like you don't want to run errands in, it's almost something like more special about that. And, you know, that's one of those things, like, is that for you? I think for me, having a car that does it all maybe is not for me. You know, I think that I might just not be that guy. I kind of want a car that is a little compromised, and this one in a lot of ways like just isn't compromised. There's sort of like no compromise on this car. But as far as like abilities, this car has the ability, when you really pitch it in, and we're not quite on the edge, but as you get to the edge, it's just so sweet, and you can make it dance. And that's one thing that 911s really have that most other cars, like I would even say M3s, this versus an M3, you know, I don't know. I've always said that this was developed to do one thing, be a 911, whereas an M3 is a 3 Series that's developed into a really good car. These are very focal sports cars, but they're a little bit too well-rounded for it to be the car that really gets my blood going in the way that a super compromised car like the 4C or like a Ferrari, where, you know, you almost feel uncomfortable parking a Ferrari some places. Like, is it going to get, you know, abused? A 911 kind of blends in a little bit more. It's just a little It's one step more sane. And I think for me and for some people that might be, it's either that's for you is either a positive or a negative. I think for me, the 911, one of the negatives, and there's not very many negatives, but one negative would be that maybe there's something a little more special. And no, I don't think a GT3 or a turbo or a more aggressive 911. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think a C2 rear wheel drive is the one. The GT3 is great, but the suspension, you know, this is, even though this is X74, so essentially, you know, getting close to GT3 levels, there's still so much pliability to this car that it's a comfortable car. Whereas again, a car that's a little more, you know, the racks typically in Ferraris are a little faster. They have a little more aggressive, I don't know, just something that's a little more compromised. The 4C, I mean, is super compromised. Or a Lotus Elise is super compromised. But I think it's something that makes that car, on the day that you choose to drive it, a little more special. So that's sort of my ethos and my thinking of 911 as a do-everything car. Now, not everybody even wants to live the life where they have 20 cars. And a 911 makes it really nice because you can get a car like this, which for all intents and purposes looks like a 996 GT3. It gets good gas mileage. It does like everything you want with the car, and maybe is just exotic enough that one car could be the performance car that you use as a daily and as a Cars and Coffee car show car. I mean, this definitely has car show vibes, especially the people that like those kids that, you know, go to car shows and look for clout cars. This is starting to get into that clout car vibe era, and that's kind of nice if you like a car that has a special vibe. And for me, the 996 is just special enough where it could be an everyday car, but maybe not quite that level where it could be an exotic. To me, they're just not exotic. So if you love a 911, my suggestion is, though, buy a 996. Forget about 993s and 964s. Buy a 996.